Hello everyone, my name is Dean and welcome back to the 20 in 20 challenge. This is week 5. Last week we took a look at creating a API in Ruby on Rails, and then we also used a completely separate JavaScript application as sort of the consumer for the API. This week we're going to be doing a similar setup where we have a Rails API, but we're going to scope it to a specific version. So that's going to require changing around how the controller and the routes function. And then we're going to use a React front end. So it's going to still work in the same way where we have this front end that makes a request for like a get to get all the information, or a post to create stuff or delete. But this time it's all going to be done from a React application, which is going to be running off of a NPM server. You could also run this with Yarn. Of course, you don't need to use your Node package manager for this stuff, but I'm going to be using NPM because that's just what I use for React stuff. You can also do this inside of a Rails application. I have a video for that. I'll link to it somewhere up here, where you can basically do all of this stuff inside of your app JavaScript folder. So I guess a couple of things I should tell you that we're going to talk about this week. We're using Material, so Material UI for React, which is similar to Bootstrap, although some of you will probably try to fight me for that. We're also going to be breaking things up into separate component files and stuff, so everything will be a bit more single responsibility principally. So you won't have 20 different functions that do sort of similar things all inside of the same file. So we'll have like a file for the form, a file for the to-do list, and a file for the to-do items by the time we're done, among other things. And my goal for this week is sort of for anyone who's trying to create a Rails React application to be able to use this as a template for what they're hoping to accomplish, but also for anyone who's not using this for Rails to still walk away with some React knowledge. So you are going to be getting a bit of both worlds here. So if you've never touched React before, you'll probably leave this knowing something, or you'll be very confused. And if you've never touched Rails before, you'll probably leave at least knowing that Rails can be used as a database, sort of, a little bit. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this little intro thing. I hope I covered everything that I wanted to. And I will see you guys in the code right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do today is create our Rails API, and we're going to do this by typing Rails new to-do API, and then I'm going to call mine _episode_1, and that's just because in the 20 in 20 GitHub repo where I post all of these, that's sort of the naming scheme that I've been trying to follow. I don't always do it, but when I remember, I try to follow it. And then after the name, we're going to type --API. So it should look like this. And that's just going to tell Rails to generate this as an API only and not have all of the usual front-end stuff included. Okay, and then after we have the API generated, we can cd into it. And I think I called it to-do API episode 1. Okay, and now I'm going to run a code dot just to open this up in a text editor. You can use whichever text editor you would like. I'm using VS Code for this. So the first thing we're going to do is come into our gem file, and we're going to uncomment this rack cors gem. And then we can come over to our terminal and just run a bundle install command, or a bundle exec bundle install command if you have other Rails projects that you're trying to, protect from your YouTube excursions and experiments. Once that's done, we can come into our config and our initializers, and then the cors.rb. And let me actually increase the font size here so that you guys can see what I'm doing. Let me back it up 1 though, so that I can see what I'm doing. So right here, they give us a config block. So we're going to uncomment this, and we're going to change the origins to an asterisk just to allow all. And then the resource is still good. So once that's done, we are finished setting up the API, at least as of right now. So now that we have the API set up, we need to actually give the API something to serve. And for this, we'll do a Rails G scaffold, and we'll create a to-do, and each to-do will have a task of type text. And then we'll hit enter. And this will generate the controller as well as the model for this. And the controller will be set up in such a way that it serves the JSON stuff instead of the usual setup that you would see in a default Rails application. So instead of redirecting to the views pages, you'll see there are no views except for the mailers. And it's just going to render these JSON things. So if I do a Rails db:/migrate real quick, And then once that's done, I do a Rails S, and I'm going to type -P and 3001. And that's just so that this runs on the port 3001. So if I come over to localhost, port 3001, you'll see that we're on the Rails server. And then if we go to /todos, you'll see that there is just an empty array being printed out on the screen. And that's because there's nothing in the database yet as far as this to-dos is concerned. So let's kill the server and type Rails C. And we're just going to create a quick to-do. So we'll say to-do.create, and it has a task, and we'll call this hello world. And then once that's done and you see that it was inserted and the transaction was committed, then we can exit out and run our Rails S-P 3001 command again. And then if we refresh this page, we should see /todos, and it'll have your JSON on the screen. Now, I am using a plugin here to view this JSON. If you don't have the plugin, you'll just see basically this whole thing on one long line with an ugly string. This was just to make things a little bit more readable. So let me bump up the font size here so you guys can see this. So each to-do item has an ID of 1, and it has a task that you need to do, and it gives you the created and the updated at. So let's change this around a bit. If you are familiar with how APIs work, generally the easiest way for you to handle changing an API, because other people rely on your service in like a codey way. So if they're trying to access your API and you make a change, you could break their entire application. So what you want to do is sort of version your controllers. So if we come up to our app controllers and we create a new folder and we call this API, and then inside of this API folder, we can create a V1 folder. Let me just delete this. So I'll right click on API and I'll hit new folder and I'll call this V1. And then we can drag our to-dos controller into the API V1. And then we just need to scope it by typing API : V1 : and that will change how this controller works. So now if you want to actually access this, you'll have to go to /API /V1 /todos. And you can see here that we get a no route matches get blah, blah, blah error here. And the reason for that is we have the old routes still inside of our config folder. So if we come into config and routes.rb, we need to change how we're doing these resources. So let's make a namespace for the API, and then we'll say do. And then inside of that, we need another namespace because we have another folder, and this is going to be the namespace for V1, and this will also have a do block. And then inside of this is where we want to put the resources for the to-dos. So now if we refresh the page, you'll see that the route is working as you would expect it to. So that takes care of versioning our API, and we also have our tasks. So now let's create the React version, or the React portion of this application. So let me open up a new window here, and I'm going to cd into the same directory I was just in. So I'm inside of the same directory. It really doesn't matter where you do this though, because you're basically just communicating via like URLs. You're not going to be doing it out of like the folder with references to anything, so you should be fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to type npx create react app, and I'm going to call this to-do _ to-do API user, maybe, and we'll just hit enter, and this should create our React app. Okay, so now we can cd into this to-do, what do I call it, to-do API user application. And we can run a npm start. And hopefully this works, and it opens up the application at localhost port 3000. So it's probably a good thing that this one's running at localhost port 3001. And then you'll see this page pop up, hopefully, which will show you, it has like a link to some document or to the React.js website. And it also tells you what to start editing if you want to start using this. So that's great. Let's kill the server and run a code dot to also open this up in a VS Code editor. And then I'm going to restart the server. And the reason is when you change anything inside of this React app, it will automatically refresh whenever you save. So that is really helpful, and it's generally just a pleasant environment to be in when you don't have to constantly tell the application to stop the server and restart the server. So let's see, where do we want to start? Let's come into our src and our app.css, and let's just get rid of everything that's in here. So if I do that, you'll see this refreshes, and this looks ugly and broken. The next thing we can do is come into our app.js, and let's get rid of this A tag, this P tag, and this image. And inside of this header, maybe we want to do something like h1, and we'll just say to-do stream. So we'll save this, and this should refresh. And now you can see we just have this h1 tag here. Now let's do something like a hr, which gives us a horizontal line, and then below this we'll want like something like ul with an li, and inside of this we'll have like to-do number 1, and then another li with to-do number 2. Just something very basic. So that's sort of what we're looking for, and then you can come up here and you can say something like this is the form area. So we have the title, we have the form, and then below the form we have the to-do items. So the first thing I guess we could do, let's get rid of this logo. And we can keep the app.css, but let's create the to-do list. So we'll say import to-do list from, and then we have to actually create this. So inside of our src, let's create a folder, and we'll call this to-do list. And inside of the to-do list, we'll create another file, and we'll call this to-do list.js. And inside of this to-do list.js, we'll just do a import React, and then component from React. Then we'll have I guess a URL reference. So we'll say API URL is equal to HTTPS localhost port 3001 /API /v1 /todos. And then below that we can do a class of to-do list extends component. And then this will, of course, have a constructor because we're using a class. So we'll say props, and then we'll call super with the props. And then we'll do a this.state is equal to, I guess we can just like call them items for now. And so what we're doing here is we construct the class, we pass in the props, we call super with the props passed in. And for these items right here, when we create one of these to-do elements, we're basically just going to call this one item. So if you had this items thing inside of your state, you'd have something like items 0 is equal to to-do number 1, and then items 1 is equal to to-do number 2. So when we make a request to the API, it's going to send us something that's like in an array, and then we're going to store that inside of this state field. So we'll just come down here and we'll say render, and then we'll return, what are we going to return? We can return a div, and then inside of this div we can do a UL, and then each of these will have like a LI, and this will be to-do number 1. And li of to-do number 2. So if we grab this to-do list and we import it from /to-do list, we should then be able to replace this UL with basically this. Let's actually do it like this instead. And then we do need to do a default export. Export default to-do list. So it looks the same, except now we have it separated into its own JS file. We could do something similar with the form, but let's maybe put the form inside of the to-do list. So up in this to-do list right here, we'll say inside of this div, we could do something like to-do form, to-do form. And we'll just leave it stubbed out for right now. And then in here, we'll create a new file. We'll call this to-do form.js. And it's going to look largely the same here. So if I just grab this entire to-do list, copy it, and paste it in here, You don't need this API URL. And then this is going to be called ToDo form instead. And the state is just going to be, we'll just leave it empty for right now. And then for this actual form in here, we'll just create like a p tag that says this is the form area. And then down here, we need to do a export default ToDo form. And then in our to-do list, we need to actually import this. So we'll say import ToDo form from /ToDo form. So now we have the form area right here being created inside of this to-do list. And we also have our to-do list items here. So that's good. Let's come into our app, and maybe what we can do now real quick is let's just add in material UI. So what we can do is we can come over here to our browser and search for material UI React, and it should give us a installation guide. So right here we have to type npm install @material-ui/core. And let me just zoom in so that I can make sure you guys can see this. We're running this command right here. So if I hit enter and I'm in the right directory, this should install Material UI for us. And we're not going to do this Roboto font. We're going to use a different font type. Okay, so that handles the material installation portion. So let me just do a npm start real quick and close this window because it's going to open another one. So we still have the same sort of look. Let's come into our index.css and let's just get rid of all of this, and we'll save this. And the next thing we can do now that we have basically a blank slate here, let's come into our app.css and we'll just say we need to set the font family. So if I come over to Google and I search for, I think it's like Source Sans Pro Google font, we can come to the fonts.google.com URL, and let me just zoom in again because it reset it. And I think I already have it selected, so let me get rid of it and refresh so you can see what this looks like on a blank page. So I'll come down to, I guess, this regular 400 and hit select style. And then it's going to give me two options for embedding. I'm going to go to the import, and I'm just going to grab it like this. So inside of our app.css at the top, I'm going to say import this font family. And then for the asterisk, I'm just going to set everything to use this font family. So now if we refresh our page, or I guess it already refreshed for us, you'll see that it should be using the Source Sans Pro font family for basically everything you click on. So that handles setting up the fonts and installing material, but now maybe we can actually add some material stuff to the application. So let's come into our app.js file. And the first thing we need to do is import, we're going to import typography, if I can spell this right. And we're going to import this from @material-ui/core/typography. And this is going to let us replace this h1 right here with a typography tag. And we'll say the variant for this is equal to h1. And then inside of this, we'll just say this is the to-do stream. So if I save this, you'll see the title here change as soon as this compiles. So now we are, and this is zoomed out, but this is at 100% what this looks like. So that takes care of creating this little typography setup. So what we're going to be doing moving forward is we're going to sort of combine React with Material UI. And if you want to, experiment with material yourself, you can go to Material UI React, and you'll see the documentation page here. So if you come in here and you search for something, like let's say we want a button, you search for it, click button, and it'll either take you to the components page or the API page. And then in here you can see basically the entire snippet for what the React file looks like that creates this stuff. And it's available for just about everything. And then if you go all the way down to the bottom of the page right here, you'll usually see the API section where you can see what all of your options are for configuring these things. But yeah, hopefully you guys will get some value out of seeing material for once instead of the usual Bootstrap stuff that I do. And we'll also see how to incorporate that into a React application. So that should be fun. But I think that's going to do it for part 1. I'm trying to get part 2 up today because I do have a interview tomorrow. So hopefully I can get this out. That way I don't have to worry about getting a video out tomorrow. But yeah, I will see you guys in the outro video. Okay, so that's going to do it for part 1. Hopefully in part 2 we can sort of flesh out this to-do list and maybe make it so that it's actually doing these fetch requests from the database or from the Rails API. And then maybe we can like separate some of the components out a bit more so we have like a to-do item inside of the to-do list and do some other fancy stuff and maybe use the material to make the application look a little bit better. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. If you like this video, remember to like it. And if you disliked it, remember to dislike it because we don't want to subject other people to more bad tutorials. You're helping other people when you dislike videos. I realize that's not something a YouTuber is supposed to say, but what can I say? I'm trying to help people. I'm not trying to be popular. So yeah, if you want to see more of these, I'll be uploading these for the next, I guess, 15 weeks. And there's probably going to be more videos after that. So maybe consider subscribing and clicking the bell or whatever the cool kids are saying. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. I will see you guys in part 2. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.